In the past, before her children were born, Daisy had been a fourth grade teacher. It shamed her now to sit before this principal as a parent, a delinquent parent, a parent who struck Mr. Lanham, no doubt, as unseeing or uncaring. It isn't that we're not concerned, she said. Both of us are. And we've done what we could, whatever we could think of. We don't let him watch TV on school nights. We don't let him talk on the phone till he's finished his homework. But he tells us he doesn't have any homework, or he did it all in study hall. How are we to know what to believe? From early October through November, at Mr. Lanham's suggestion, Daisy checked Donnie's assignments every day. She sat next to him as he worked, trying to be encouraging, sagging inwardly as she saw the poor quality of everything he did. The sloppy mistakes in math, the illogical leaps in his English themes, the history questions left blank if they required any research. So again, this information highlighted in yellow relates to Daisy's behavior, and it should be placed on the chart. Daisy was often late starting supper, and she couldn't give as much attention to Donnie's younger sister. "You'll never guess what happened at," Amanda would begin, and Daisy would have to tell her, "Not now, honey." By the time her husband, Matt, came home, she'd be snappish. She would recite the day's hardships, the fuzzy instructions in English, the botched history map, the morass of unsolvable algebra equations. Matt would look surprised and confused, and Daisy would gradually wind down. There was no way, really, to convey how exhausting all this was. In December, the school called again. This time they wanted Matt to come as well. She and Matt had to sit on Mr. Lanham's couch like two bad children and listen to the news. Donnie had improved only slightly, raising a D in history to a C and a C in algebra to a B minus. What was worse, he had developed new problems. He had cut classes on at least 3 occasions, smoked in the furnace room, helped Sonny Barnett break into a freshman's locker, and last week during athletics, he and 3 friends had been seen off the school grounds. When they returned, the coach had smelled beer on their breath. Daisy and Matt sat silent, shocked. Matt rubbed his forehead with his fingertips. Imagine, Daisy thought, how they must look to Mr. Lanham, an overweight housewife in a cotton dress and a too tall, too thin insurance agent in a baggy frayed suit. Failures, both of them, the kind of people who are always hurrying to catch up, missing the point of things that everyone else grasps at once. She wished she'd worn nylons instead of knee socks. It was arranged that Donnie would visit a psychologist for testing. Mr. Lanham knew just the person. He would set this boy straight, he said. When they stood to leave, Daisy held her stomach in and gave Mr. Lanham a firm, responsible handshake. Donnie said the psychologist was a jackass and the tests were really dumb. But he kept all 3 of his appointments, and when it was time for the follow-up conference with the psychologist and both parents, Donnie combed his hair and seemed unusually sober and subdued. The psychologist said Donnie had no serious emotional problems. He was merely going through a difficult period in his life. He required some academic help and a better sense of self-worth. For this reason, he was suggesting a man named Calvin Beadle, a tutor with considerable psychological training. In the car going home, Donnie said he'd be damned if he'd let them drag him to some stupid fairy tutor. His father told him to watch his language in front of his mother. That night, Daisy lay awake, pondering the term self-worth. She had always been free with her praise. She had always told Donnie he had talent, was smart, was good with his hands. She had made a big to-do over every little gift he gave her. In fact, maybe she had gone too far, although Lord knows she had meant every word. Was that his trouble? She remembered when Amanda was born. Donnie had acted lost and bewildered. Daisy had been alert to that, of course, but still, a new baby keeps you so busy. Had she really done all she could have? She longed, she ached for a time machine. Given one more chance, she'd do it perfectly. Hug him more, praise him more, or perhaps praise him less. Oh, who can say? The tutor told Donnie to call him Cal. All his kids did, he said. Daisy thought for a second that he meant his own children, then realized her mistake. He seemed too young, anyhow, to be a family man. He wore a heavy brown handlebar mustache. His hair was as long and stringy as Donnie's, and his jeans as faded. Wire-rimmed spectacles slid down his nose. He lounged in a canvas director's chair with his fingers laced across his chest, and he casually, amiably questioned Donnie, who sat upright and glaring in an armchair. "So they're getting on your back at school," said Cal, "making a big deal about anything you do wrong." "Right," said Donnie. "Any idea why that would be?" "Oh, well, stuff like homework and all," Donnie said. "You don't do your homework?" "Oh, well, I might do it sometimes, but just not exactly how they want it." Donnie sat forward and said, "It's like a prison there, you know? You've got to go to every class. You can never step off the school grounds." I highlighted this quote because you should include it in the last column on your worksheet. This is a statement from Donnie about the school. "You cut classes sometimes?" "Sometimes," Donnie said with a glance at his parents. Cal didn't seem perturbed. "Well," he said, "I'll tell you what. Let's you and me try working together 3 nights a week. Think you can handle that? We'll see if we can show that school of yours a thing or two. Give it a month. Then if you don't like it, we'll stop. If I don't like it, we'll stop. I mean, sometimes people just don't get along, right? What do you say to that?" "Okay," Donnie said. He seemed pleased. "Make it 7 o'clock till 8. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday," Cal told Matt and Daisy. They nodded. Cal shambled to his feet, gave them a little salute, and showed them to the door. This was where he lived as well as worked, evidently. The interview had taken place in the dining room, which had been transformed into a kind of office. Passing the living room, Daisy winced at the rock music she had been hearing, without registering it, ever since she had entered the house. She looked in and saw a boy about Donnie's age lying on a sofa with a book. Another boy and a girl were playing ping pong in front of the fireplace. "You have several here together?" Daisy asked Cal. "Oh, sometimes they stay on after their sessions just to rap. They're a pretty sociable group, all in all. Plenty of goof-offs like young Donnie here." He cuffed Donnie's shoulder playfully. Donnie flushed and grinned. Climbing into the car, Daisy asked Donnie, "Well, what did you think?" But Donnie had returned to his old evasive self. He jerked his chin toward the garage. "Look," he said, "he's got a basketball net." Now on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, they had supper early the instant Matt came home. Sometimes they had to leave before they were really finished. Amanda would still be eating her dessert. "Bye, honey. Sorry," Daisy would tell her. Cal's first bill sent a flutter of panic through Daisy's chest. But it was worth it, of course. Just look at Donnie's face when they picked him up, alight and full of interest. The principal telephoned Daisy to tell her how Donnie had improved. "Of course, it hasn't shown up in his grades yet, but several of the teachers have noticed how his attitude's changed." "Yes, sir, I think we're onto something here." At home, Donnie didn't act much different. He still seemed to have a low opinion of his parents, but Daisy supposed that was unavoidable. Part of being 15. He said his parents were too controlling. Another quote from Donnie. A word that made Daisy give him a sudden look. He said they acted like wardens. On weekends, they enforced a curfew. And any time he went to a party, they always telephoned first to see if adults would be supervising. "For God's sake," he said, "don't you trust me?" "It isn't a matter of trust, honey," but there was no explaining to him. His tutor called one afternoon. "I get the sense," he said, "that this kid's feeling underestimated, like you folks expect the worst of him. I'm thinking we ought to give him more rope." So that's a quote from the tutor. "I think we ought to give him more rope," meaning more freedom. "But see, he's still so suggestible," Daisy said. "When his friends suggest some mischief, smoking or drinking or such, why, he just finds it hard not to go along with them." "Mrs. Coble," the tutor said, "I think this kid is hurting, Here's a serious, sensitive kid telling you he'd like to take on some grown-up challenges. And you're giving him the message that he can't be trusted. Don't you understand how that hurts?" "Oh," said Daisy. "It undermines his self-esteem. Don't you realize that?" "Well, I guess you're right," said Daisy. She saw Donnie suddenly from a whole new angle. His pathetically poor posture, that slouch so forlorn that his shoulders seemed about to meet his chin. Oh, wasn't it awful being young? She'd had a miserable adolescence herself and had always sworn no child of hers would ever be that unhappy. They let Donnie stay out later. They didn't call ahead to see if the parties were supervised, and they were careful not to grill him about his evening. The tutor had set down so many rules. They were not allowed any questions at all about any aspect of school, nor were they to speak with his teachers. If a teacher had some complaint, she should phone Cal. Only one teacher disobeyed, the history teacher, Miss Evans. She called one morning in February. "I'm a little concerned about Donnie, Mrs. Coble." "Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Evans, but Donnie's tutor handles these things now." "I always deal directly with the parents. You are the parent," Miss Evans said, speaking very slowly and distinctly. "Now, here is the problem. Back when you were helping Donnie with his homework, his grades rose from a D to a C, but now they've slipped back, and they're closer to an F." "They are?" "I think you should start overseeing his homework again." "But Donnie's tutor says—" "It's nice that Donnie has a tutor, but you should still be in charge of his homework. With you, he learned it. Then he passed his tests. With the tutor, well, it seems the tutor is more of a crutch. Donnie, I say, a quiz is coming up on Friday. Hadn't you better be listening instead of talking?" "That's okay, Miss Evans," he says. "I have a tutor now, like a talisman. I really think you ought to take over, Mrs. Coble." "I see," said Daisy. "Well, I'll think about that. Thank you for calling." Hanging up, she felt a rush of anger at Donnie. A talisman! For a talisman, she'd given up all luxuries, all that time with her daughter, her evenings at home. She dialed Cal's number. He sounded muzzy. "I'm sorry if I woke you," she told him, "but Donnie's history teacher just called. She says he isn't doing well." "She should have dealt with me." "She wants me to start supervising his homework again. His grades are slipping." "Yes," said the tutor, "but you and I both know there's more to it than mere grades, don't we? I care about the whole child, his happiness, his self-esteem. The grades will come up, just give them time." When she hung up, it was Miss Evans she was angry at. What a narrow woman! It was Cal this, Cal that, Cal says this, Cal and I did that. Cal lent Donnie an album by The Who. He took Donnie and 2 other pupils to a rock concert. In March, when Donnie began to talk endlessly on the phone with a girl named Miriam, Cal even let Miriam come to one of the tutoring sessions. Daisy was touched that Cal would grow so involved in Donnie's life, but she was also a little hurt because she had offered to have Miriam to dinner and Donnie had refused. Now he asked them to drive her to Cal's house without a qualm. I'm going to pause here and continue reading in the next video.